The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. We had a blast hanging out with all of you at Security Weekly Unlocked last week. Thank you again for helping us make our first virtual event a success all around. If you missed any of the presentations while you were chatting away at our Discord server or furiously clicking your mouse trying to get in the top 10 for Security Weekly Trivia, you can now access all of the content on demand, whether you registered before the live event or not, by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked, clicking either the button to register or the button to log in to the environment. We have officially wrapped up all of our recordings for 2020 webcasts and technical training. Stay tuned as we build out our schedule for next year. In the meantime, check out everything webcast related and technical training related 2020 on securityweekly.com/on-demand. And with that, we will continue our discussion of the SolarWinds breach, because it's all about SolarWinds. SolarWinds, anyone?
I'll take SolarWinds for 800.
SolarWinds for 800. I did see a quote from the vice president and chief technology officer at Mandiant that said they initially detected the incident because we saw a suspicious authentication. And I believe he goes on to be quoted to say it was not SolarWinds, which was kind of confusing in this article. This article...
Wait. The initial vector was not SolarWinds?
Correct.
What?
Yes. That's what this article said.
That's interesting.
That's what we just got done talking about for the last hour.
Right.
SolarWinds is the tip of the spear.
Some articles said that it was not.
Yeah, that's one of the big things right now is that there's so much conjecture and there's so much that we're getting little bits and pieces, and some of them are contradictory, and some of it's fake news and some of it's not, and that's the really hard part now is separating the wheat from the chaff.
It did say this article did say they said there was a fundamental misunderstanding of how this attack unfolded. We determined the SolarWinds compromise was the original attack vector. I'm sorry. So there was stuff that said, articles that said that it wasn't SolarWinds. You guys are correct. It was, in fact, SolarWinds.
Got it. But from my understanding was that, yes, they detected this unusual authentication over VPN, if I remember correctly,
right,
for a device that had been enrolled in their two-factor.
Yes.
That this was unusual, which led them to trace it back to SolarWinds. So.
That makes you wonder how long this would have went on if that one visibility point was not there. When you start to think about enterprise security and where all your visibility or visibility gaps are, if you miss that one kind of indicator, or you have a gap with inside your visibility at that one juncture, that could be the difference between a really bad day and a really good day of, being able to detect that. That long-term access could have been, we might not have even known this.
Yeah, props to that engineer at FireEye that uncovered that, kind of process indicator. That's pretty cool.
Yep. And, again, we get to speculate. Now, the question is, why did they need to go and do that to get that resources when they allegedly already had something that was highly covert? And And was it that they weren't getting the amount of data as fast as they needed, so they needed to find other ways to pivot and exfiltrate? I think speculation abounds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the big piece of that is the fact that they built it into the build tells that they needed to be able to get into another organization that would be relying on that update and that piece of product. Like there was pre-knowledge of that product being integrated into certain objectives or organizations, aka probably U.S. government of some kind. And so that kind of, I think that alludes to what one of their objectives or targets was. Because that's what they were leveraging for that kind of low-level, super stealthy TTP.
Yeah, CISA described this as an APT actor that demonstrated patience, operational security, and complex tradecraft in these intrusions. Yet they tripped an alarm somewhere, at FireEye.
There's always, again, it goes back to there's only so many initial access vectors. There's only so many ways to get something to execute. You have to get really creative to get execution on a box, but that still relies on the fact that code has to execute and certain universal truths around how that execution has to happen on a computer system is in play. And so no matter how stealthy you are and how creative you get, you really have to try and figure out how to blend in to get certain noisy actions done, aka dropping a file and execution.
Yeah, and I think the big one that really helped them in this case, Tyler, was that by compromising the dev process and being inserted into legitimate code from SolarWinds, that all of that stuff got signed by SolarWinds certificates, their code signing certs. So legitimate stuff that everybody was trusting, or in these cases, everybody was trusting.
And the trusted binaries that execute them, right? So that code being in there and that trust. Without some of the initial IOCs and without some of those first start visibility points, again, you're relying on something that is very difficult to test. And I am kind of curious why they leveraged certain domains instead of doing something like proxying cloud fronting using Slack for C2 channels or email that's trusted that's going to blend in a little bit more. Going to a single domain that had no categorization or wasn't is fairly obvious once you find it. Like I would think there'd be some different persistence, additional C2 frameworks, different persistent mechanisms that are going to be calling out to other more trusted platform or comms channels. Like for the level of sophistication they had, I'm still not convinced that we are seeing everything that they're using.
I think there's someone saying right now in Russian, this is the last time we trust the new people to build out the CNC infrastructure.
Exactly.
They gave one aspect to a rookie.
They did. They're like, let's see what these new folks coming in can do. Let's give them the CNC infrastructure, right? Like that's, that was a mistake.
What could possibly go
we
wrong?
got this exploit that's been sitting around for a while. We don't know what to do with it. Let's have the new kids build out the CNC and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yep. The thing that I think is kind of interesting about it, Tyler, is that I think they did a really good job of picking the domain, given that, these Orion implementations, would they be calling out to Slack? Maybe not. Would they be calling out to AWS Cloud? Yes, that seems more reasonable to me, that there's some call out to other infrastructure, but it wasn't AWS Cloud, it was AVS Cloud, if I remember correctly. And at the common look, you're like, oh, shit's tripping on AWS Cloud. Well, that's clearly wrong, and you don't read carefully enough, and you let those alerts go by. There was. That makes sense.
Why not use a legitimate one? Like you could have used the EC2 instance name that was provided to you, or an Azure subdomain. Like there seems like there's a ton more tradecraft out there that would have been much better utilized from that standpoint, where they got so many things right and they did some pretty cool infra, and then they mess up on domain name. Like that just single domain name nonetheless. Like that just doesn't add up.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, because it's, even in my red teaming, even in assumed compromise tests that I do, I mean, I'll end up running traffic through CloudFront or one of those CDNs. So it's not like it's hard to do that, right? So yeah,
for the level of effort they put in and the targets they're hitting, like you would think that they'd pick some better categorized or cloud fronted, or even using one of the services as a jump proxy. Like there's a ton of ways to do that are not hard, that we utilize. That just, it doesn't add up to the rest of the sophistication. But again, it could have been handed off access. It could have been secondary teams handling those. Like there's a ton of possibilities.
One of the analysis firms said that their analysis indicates that these compromises are not self-propagating, that each of these attacks required meticulous planning and manual interaction.
Yes.
Whoa.
That was my understanding as well.
It's interesting.
So Tyler, on the specific tradecraft and them, screwing up that domain thing, and we've already got some alleged attribution with APT 29 and Cozy Bear, and I forget the other name. But if we think about the level of sophistication or the lack thereof, does this call into question potentially what we do from a red team and the level of sophistication that we put into those attacks, when clearly that the screw ups went unnoticed for months?
Yeah, that is a good, and there has been a lot of discussion around like what is the level of sophistication that a red team brings. Like, is there actual value in that? Like, yeah, we have the capability to look and do UEFI persistence, but why would we do that as a red team? Because that doesn't provide any value to our customer or client, because they're not going to have any way to detect that. Like, unless they're using Eclipsium or like some off the wall thing, and that their threat profile justifies that level of sophistication. Like, you really do have to tailor and match your sophistication for an engagement to the client, because like you're saying, like from an emulation standpoint, these guys made some key mistakes. And so is that something that we should be emulating? Should we be less stealthy for some of our more mature clients? Should we give them opportunity to find those single points of visibility?
Yeah, I mean, that calls into question, and Joff, you said it too. We know we have this tradecraft to be able to go and be stealthy, and APT 29 in this particular case, after the infiltrations through Orion, didn't use that tradecraft, and they still went undetected for months. That brings to question to me: are we doing the right thing by the folks that we're doing red team against? And are we bringing too much A game? And when the actual threat actors, nation state sponsored folks are not bringing that level of A game, are we going too far?
The answer is yes.
Yeah,
I think the answer is yes. I mean, it's an interesting question because in our industry, our biggest worry and concern is that we're not bringing enough A game. But
apparently, we're bringing too much.
Apparently, when you get to like we're bringing too much, it's like, what? Hold on a minute.
How'd that happen?
That's where the purple team and collaboration really has to come into play. We have to provide them with more ability and insight to gain visibility and have detection for all levels of sophistication, because the attacks are going to come in different forms. And if you are a target, you may be getting targeted by script kiddies, you may be getting targeted by criminal syndicates, you may be getting targeted by nation states, but you have to be able to detect at all those levels. And that means doing the behavioral detection, getting the fundamentals right, and having that defense in depth properly configured and tuned and alerted at all of those levels. And that is where collaboration has to come in. If you just strictly can protect against A-game actors, you probably will detect a lot of the script kiddies, but there may be this in-between gap where certain things are just dumb and you don't have visibility because you haven't tuned for those specific behaviors.
There was an article that said that Reuters, it was in reference to the password to the update server being SolarWinds 123. Reuters also reported that hackers claiming they could sell access to SolarWinds computers since 2017. Had we missed this for that long? Or SolarWinds did?
It's possible.
Possibly. Maybe not the build. Maybe they've had access and they've had long-term persistence, but the coordinated objective and the targeted sequence of attacks has some very specific things around it. And so maybe the build process was the outcome from that long-term persistence or access.
So like, how hard did they work to get into SolarWinds and be like, we have access to SolarWinds, we don't have the update server though, and then realize, the password to the update server is 12345. And someone goes, wait, that's the password to my luggage.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it was probably a lot more sophisticated than that. That they likely had, and I'm speculation. We get to do that on a podcast. They likely had an end goal, and they calculated all of the paths to that goal, and to define the easiest path and did a lot of exploration over a lot of time. I mean, these particular groups are being identified as being stealthy and sort of long-term, in for the long con, as it were. I mean, this could have been, 2017 in the making, that they got access to this stuff and just kept it silent because they knew that was a potential path.
Did they use machine learning to visualize all of their attack paths?
I think
Johnny,
they might have
run into the studio and slap Paul on the back of the head real quick for us.
Machine learning, man.
I think they needed that long-term access, though, because in order to figure out some of the build processes and understand their DevOps cycle and what controls they have in place in order to get this code in and do that efficiently without losing access or getting caught before they had the opportunity to carry out the final objective, I think that can take some serious time to understand that. So it doesn't surprise me that if they were in there for at least 3 years trying to figure out, how do we get there? Here's our objective. Here's what we're going to do. And then build that into the code base so that it got pushed unseen. Again, that's not easy to do in a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
Now, can we double back to? Hold on,
go ahead, Jeff.
I've been trying to get in. I've been trying to break in here for like 10 minutes. It's okay. It's not your fault, Larry. I blame Paul. I want to double back
Tyler
on
and then Jeff.
Shut up. Johnny, go slap Paul for me.
I protest.
Oh man,
I want to double back to what Tyler was saying about detection, and we're talking about the A game, B game, C game of pen testing. But what about simply how often are your pen tests just about the detection? It's not finding juicy findings, but it's teaching your customers what to look for. Detection has been a term that's come up several times on the Discord this evening for the last 2 hours or so. Part of me thinks that, at the end of the day, whether we're talking vulnerability prioritization, whether we're talking about what do you need an O day? Do you need to bring your A game, B game, or C game to a pen test? Is a pen test, what does it do for you at the end of the day? Seems to me all of this comes down to detection. Assuming that you've been breached, which is a term that's been floated around a lot the last couple of days in a lot of different venues in terms of discussing this whole SolarWinds thing. What if at the end of the day it's all about monitoring your network and detecting that something amiss is happening, something unusual is happening, because they might be sitting in your organization and your network for months and years, but eventually they're going to do something. And if they're passively stealing data, they got to be getting it out somehow. How do you detect it? Should we start rethinking about maybe refocusing our efforts, especially from a pen testing methodology perspective, on teaching companies how to become better at the detection element of this whole thing?
It's not our job. it's not our job. I mean,
well, what is your job?
I mean, it could be if we get paid for it, right? I mean,
could be.
Yeah, I mean, you have a point, and I think those companies that are doing more assumed compromise or purple team like activities definitely have an element of that. But I think where a lot of us stop short is we're not going to teach you. We're going to say this is the offensive technique we're using. Here's some possible recommendations of things you could look at in terms of detective controls. But it's up to you to invent the detective control ultimately. So not our job. I was not. I was only half joking there, right? I mean, to some extent, it is not our job, but it is certainly our responsibility to say, here's the technique. You should be aware that this technique exists. And here's some references where you could develop some defensive tradecraft or some defensive or detective controls around that technique. So we're already doing that. I don't know about anybody else, but I imagine Larry is too. And I imagine imagined a lot of folks are.
Well, I think what I'm asking you, Joff, though, is, okay, that's not your job. Maybe it should be your job. Maybe that's what the engagement should become. And I think you're still a little bit, and this might be just me mishearing you, but you still seem to be focused more on, attacks and vulnerability exploitation. What if and maybe I need to be more specific. What if the detection is not of the attack, but it's of what are they doing with the fact that they have access? I don't know what you call that, but exfiltration. I assume that's a goal. I assume that's a goal of most everybody, regardless what their motivation is, that they want to exfil something.
Well, lateral movement. I mean, to that point, lateral movement too.
Yep.
You can move laterally without exploiting anything, right? Lateral movement could just be I access a file share, right? And that's what we sometimes call lateral movement. But exfiltration certainly is part of that. But that is part of some of the assessments that I've seen is where we test all the different ways to exfil and which ones can you test. I mean,
it is. It is definitely the part of our shtick. But I think that there's a subtle point in there that you're trying to illustrate, Jeff, and I think it's important actually that the detective controls. And I always worry about this actually as a pen tester. The detective controls need not be focused on the specific technique for the attack. They need to be more generalizable to the tactics that the attacker is using, because the actual technological technique, the actual implementation of any one attack can be done in 100,000 different ways in many cases, right? There's probably, take an example like maybe password spraying. There's probably 5 or 10 different ways to do that alone, and that's going to leave multiple different areas of evidence. And the defensive side of the house needs to be thinking in terms of, ultimately the actual tactics and the focus of the goal that's occurring, not so much the technique itself. So I think that's what you were kind of going for. Although I may have morphed that into a little bit of a different discussion at the same time.
Well, I wasn't going for anything. I was asking the question, which is a question I always ask: should we rethink this? Should we be doing something different? Should we try something different? Because and I should distinguish, and for the benefit of our listening audience, and especially those that also listen to Security and Compliance Weekly, because we were talking about pen testing this week. I see a huge difference between the pen testing services that you guys do at Black Hills and Trusted Sec and in Guardians and whatever company Tyler's working for this week. A game companies, and as far as pen test goes, and all the customers that I work with, that they're never gonna be your customers, because they're not gonna pay for you, because all they want to do is get the box checked. All they want to do is get the bare minimum, whatever passes the PCI, pen test checklist, rather than take advantage of we have to do a pen test. Why don't we get something out of it? Why don't we do it to actually learn something or actually test our defenses? Is what I'm harping on. And there is a divide between, I assume most of your customers are financial services, insurance companies, large enterprises that have maybe pharmaceutical companies, based on what I was hearing last night. But, companies that have the budget and can afford it and can pay you guys good money to spend the time to try different things and try all the different techniques. That's not the experience of most companies out there. So
no, that's a true statement. And
so what I'm saying is, when I'm knocking pen testing, I'm not knocking you guys. I'm knocking everybody else.
So does everybody else
don't?
not
But what Jeff just said
those?
was, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah,
thank you.
I mean, that is what he said.
No, there's a lot of truth to what Jeff's saying, right? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of the industry, and this does diverge into a different discussion, but there's a tremendous amount of the industry that can make lots of money by throwing vulnerability scanners and dedicated application scanners at things, and then rebranding a report, and getting boxes checked for people. That's fine. That's not what we do, as Jeff pointed out. And we do tend to cater to the higher end companies that do have the budget to afford a real, more like 70% manual effort versus 70% automated effort kind of penetration test. So there's a distinct difference in the industry without a doubt. I was talking to a customer today. I mean, we actually hear it from the customers when they come to us. They're like, "Hey, we're not looking for one of the box checking tests." That was literally a phrase I heard today, and we'll say, "Yeah, we don't do that, right? That's not what we're here for."
But I think
it's a valid point.
Even the smaller companies can get good value out of a pen test if they choose, the good company. If you scope that properly and your pen test company knows how to fit that budget and then provide recommendations that do have those detection capabilities that are, vendor agnostic, blinky light agnostic, and can fit within inside of a budget. I mean, you can do a ton with what's built into Microsoft using things like Sysmon. There's free log ingestion.
Oh, totally
things
true.
like Gravwell.
Yeah.
So I think the size of the organization does not always necessarily mean the security. Some of the smaller ones we've done actually have been fairly secure, and they're a much harder target if they're properly doing their defense in depth. But you do have to know how to get the value out of a pen test and a pen test company to fit with inside your budget. You got to scope that right. You've got to make sure that they understand what the budget is, and you have to get the value out of the detection. That's where these small companies can be agile. They have the ability to know what's in their environment. It's small, and they can put good detection and good depth strategies in place so that long term, they may be a much harder target than some of the bigger, well-funded enterprises out there.
Yeah, so we don't, just to echo that, we don't tend to do red teams, right? Pure, unannounced kind of tests for the small or medium-sized companies because they cannot afford those. Typically, they're more expensive exercises. But we do turn.
But I was going to say, but more importantly, they're not ready. That's right. It would be a waste of their money and a waste of your time.
That's right. It's a mismatch,
and it wouldn't be fun.
But we do tend to do a lot of these
it might be fun.
More assumed compromise or purple team style exercises with companies of all sizes, and they can benefit a lot from them. They're more cost efficient, from our perspective and for their perspective as well, and they get a lot of bang for the buck out of them. So there's a lot of that going on with us. I'm sure with Tyler and same with Larry.
I'm interested to also segue off of this topic, but also see what comes next in the SolarWinds breach. I really truly believe there will be a book. Like there's enough of a story here and so many pieces to the puzzle that I think it's going to be interesting in a source of really good lessons learned for a long time that may shape and change. Yep. Maybe how we do some pen tests, how we do adjust our defenses, how we become a lot more resilient.
And so Paul, the last little bit that I sort of want to mention about the book, like we've seen all the books on the other compromises, and we've talked about compromises in many different directions. But the thing, I've said it before, and I've said it on national television on CBS Sunday Morning, and I wonder what will come out of this in that, in the U.S., we do not do physical retaliation for cyber attacks. I would argue that we don't largely do cyber attacks in retaliation for cyber attacks. But the point being is that we probably have the same level of access to some of our adversaries.
Yeah, but that's a great point, because if we did, would we have seen this attack coming? If we were infiltrated into this particular group in what I assume is the Russian GRU, I mean, there's Fancy Bear, this is Crazy Bear. Maybe by these fancy terms we give them, which I don't quite understand, does that mean they're
APT-29?
APT-29, great.
And for the record, I say we don't typically. Doesn't mean we don't.
Right.
I said we don't typically.
Well, we don't get caught, and if we did have that insight, we probably wouldn't tip our hand just to save a company because our access
we certainly, Tyler,
very strategic.
But we also wouldn't leak our tools, Eternal Blue Equation Group. We would never do anything like that. this is going to be conversations we're going to keep having, right? These are
it's going to be a lot.
It's an ebb and flow, right? And we only know about certain things when they become public. We may have knowledge of other things. We can't talk about those on the show. Sorry, listeners.
It's the Cold War all over again. On steroids.
Pretty.
So we're going to see
pretty accurate, Jeff. Actually,
we are going to see a massive upsurge in people in the industry. Probably the venture capitalists will start pushing this pretty quickly for securing supply chain side of the house, and probably with a big DevOps spin on it.
Well, but to Jeff's point earlier, like we shouldn't have to, right? We should be able to adopt tools and technology that already exist. Which I argue already exists.
No, but I think Joff's saying it more succinctly. What can we do as a show to try to prevent the cyber ambulance chasing that all the vendors are going to bombard everybody with after the holiday break?
Right, because right after the break, all the VC is going to get behind supply chain security, and they are going to push it, and it's going to turn into a big conversation whether we like it or not. And we're going to end up having customers come to us and ask about it. So, we had better be thinking, because, fear does drive money in the purse strings, and it's going to be a topic whether we like it or not.
Yeah. I mean, interesting because it's not a new attack vector by any stretch.
I hear Lee chiming in the background there.
Lee.
So I'm thinking about, shorter horizon, all the folks that have been popped with this latest event, and that are in highly regulated spaces that are going to get all kinds of help to recover and analysis and help that they can't turn down. I mean, you may feel a little pressure here, right? It just
and by help you mean all those phishing emails that are going to start coming out?
Oh, I was thinking about the teams of folks that'll show up to fix it. And roll up the covers. We're going to have a little exam here.
Snap those.
SolarWindsFix.com.
That's it. Visit here now, and we'll scan your environment.
I've already gotten those. I've already gotten those email.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
It started.
So I do want to.
Tyler already owns SolarWindsFix.com.
That's it.
Feels like a good time to segue.
So 51% of work from home parents say children have accessed their work accounts. Now, this is really kind of hilarious, actually, and I want to read. So in this survey, this was done by 1Password, who makes a great product, by the way. But nearly half of parents let children access devices with saved passwords on them. 14% admit kids have caused trouble by accessing an account with a saved password. The part that I like or dislike the best is one noted their child got into their bank account and wired money to a random account. I think that the kid probably owned that account, would be my guess. They wired themselves money. Don't.
I find this interesting, Paul, that and I think about my household that my kids would never have access doing work from home because they're potentially virtual, because we have their own devices for that. In fact, we have a Chromebook that was purchased for other stuff that the only thing that we do from that is virtual karate. And everybody in the family, except for my wife, uses it because that's what that machine does. And both kids have their own school-provided Chromebooks that do computer stuff for school. Mm-hmm. And we've caught the little one doing YouTube on her Chromebook. But no, don't do that on your school computer. Do that from your iPad or on the TV. But if I think about that, we're the technology 1%ers, that there are so many families, across the world that you've got to use dad's work computer to go to school, that I can see this very much happening.
Yeah. No, I can too. That. And even, if you have a computer, maybe you've got your work account, or you create an account on that computer like I did, and I log into my work email. But when my son uses it, he has his own account on that computer, right? It's not owned by work; it's owned by me. But we separation of duties. Like you don't log on with dad's account.
Yeah, you're doing schoolwork from dad's gaming computer, very similar to your environment, Paul. But dad uses his gaming computer to pay the bills or to access OnlyFans or something like that at some point.
We don't do that. The kids have their own gaming computer, and I have my own computer for OnlyFans.
But again, we are the technology 1%ers, right? I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
We're bad examples in this case.
yeah, Lee.
Well, I remember a use case I used to see is that, the parents are home with their work computer and the kid needs to create a paper, and they've got the whole Office Suite license from the work computer. So they just, they're logging as themselves, and they just hand the keyboard over to the kid because they don't want to pay the license. Now, with all the free alternatives right now, that's not probably as much of a thing, but I could see it happening. It's just more expeditious to use the working application, the computer, and they didn't stop to think that that's really not an appropriate environment to turn the kid loose with for a few hours.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're bad examples, right? Because you might be forced to use different computers or technology just to get stuff. I mean, just this morning in my house, my wife's like, well, this son has a Zoom call at this time, and this one has a Zoom call. And I'm like, my Zoom call starts at 9:30. Like, when does their Zoom call start? Like, we've all got to get on a computer with a working microphone and camera that can run Zoom pretty much all at the same time. And so if we don't have enough, computers to go around, then to your point, Lee, like we're sharing at some point, and that's bad. And to Larry's point, we're the technology 1%ers. Like we love buying computers and technology. We we love doing it. We have it for all different, even if it's for one of our kids, after they go to bed, we're like, the new Chromebook, like I wonder if I can sniff the firmware update and reverse engineer it, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're in that 1%. Most normal people hate buying new computers, right?
Well,
a lot of people do.
I think about it, Paul, and I think I have 15 laptops sitting here in my office, all for various purposes. Like, it's
only fans.
Only when I get them, spun up and doing some VMs and stuff, and then the fans turn on. But
yeah, I mean, this group is pretty unique that way. I mean, a friend of mine I was talking to yesterday, and he said two words that I thought would totally troll me and probably Joff: Circuit Python. And he's got Arduinos that what they do or equivalents that just run Python. I mean, shit. How quick would be like searching on Amazon to buy those? We'd probably do it during the broadcast.
Yeah, might buy two.
Lee, I don't need to search because I've got a couple. They're literally sitting right here.
Yeah.
Damn it.
I hate it. So I think we all have an illness.
The problem, though, right? Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say, I think Larry's right on track, right? We are totally the technology 1%ers. We are not representative of the overall population.
Except for Jeff. Jeff says he's not in that 1%.
Yeah, but he's weird in other ways, though.
But this only addresses one issue, though, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Tyler?
Let's talk about Signal.
Wait, Tyler.
All right, Tyler, and then we'll talk about Signal.
The last word.
I was just going to say this only addresses the hardware level of like a work accounts getting access and computers getting access. You also have the network to think about. Most people's networks aren't segmented. And so that brings up the point of, from a work standpoint, should the hardware be separate? Should we be issuing employees like Windows to go or kids Windows to go so that the hardware is just doing the computing? And once the jump drive or Windows to go hard drive's unplugged, that computing environment that say passwords, those accounts are separate from the hardware, and anybody can use the hardware. Like, these seem like there's creative solutions out there that have already been addressed and already done this. We're just not leveraging them in the kind of the same way or thinking about devices in the same way. We have multiple computers and devices, but what if you just had one computer where the hardware was utilized and different people utilize that hardware with different OSs or operating systems separate?
The Signal app, apparently Celebrite, I believe is the Israeli company, right, that famously broke the iPhone encryption for the U.S. government, if my memory serves me correctly, has claimed that they broke the crypto on Signal. And so what I gather is they posted some details to their site and then took them down. But the link, my story number 3, contains those details in the link of what they posted. And it was something about gaining access to the SQLite or SQL database that contains all of your encrypted messages and or passwords that they were able to access. And one of the commenters was like, and so they need physical access to the phone in order to do this. But if they have physical access to the phone, you can just open up Signal and read all of the messages as well.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Like, this was one of those. fanatic kind of spotlight, I think, gets some publicity out of what's going on right now. Because again, you're right. If you have physical access, you can open the app. If you have the ability to unlock the phone, you can get to Signal. Maybe if Signal has its separate passcode from the phone and you can't get into that passcode, then yeah, maybe this is, with physical access, a big deal that you can get to the SQLite and decrypt that. But again, they made it sound like Signal was insecure and the way that they were using encryption was insecure. I mean, we got a bunch of calls around that, and I was like, that's crap.
No, Moxie, but this has happened to Moxie before, and he's very quick to correct it. And maybe he has. I mean, I just saw the story today, but I haven't seen any official statement from the folks at Signal. But usually when stuff like this happens to Signal, for example, or even to LastPass as an example, they're not attacking the crypto that's built into the product, right? They're attacking the environment where these applications run, such as in the browser or on an Android device, as an example.
And Paul, this is exactly what happened. Celebrite admitted that this was not a new and novel technique for them to recover Signal messages. It only works on Android.
Yep.
And it only works because you're able to recover the keys from the key store on the Android device, and you have to be able to do that.
Well, you would have to break the encryption on the phone, so know the password or the biometric fingerprint or facial ID to get into the phone. Because isn't that the key for encrypting the phone on Android? All of them are, well, not, I shouldn't say all, but like the Pixel devices as an example, they're encrypted by default.
But you can turn that off, right?
I think if you dig through the settings, you might be able to turn it off. I haven't looked in a while. I know my first Pixel, I looked and I was like encrypted by default, and every other Pixel since then. At some point, I stopped checking to see if it's enabled by default.
As only a casual Android user, and I probably need to pick up a really actually more modern Android phone just because, to have that volume of knowledge, law enforcement uses the same type of stuff to gain access to the phones, and you don't hear law enforcement trying to sue Google for not being able to get access to the Android devices, but they sue Apple because they can't get access to the iOS devices.
Right. I guess it depends on your threat actor profile. I'm actually not sure how easy or difficult it would be to, if you got someone's Android device and it was locked and encrypted, how easy and or difficult it is. I would venture to guess it depends on which version of Android, obviously, and which hardware that it's running on as well. Hopefully the Pixel 5 is better.
Again, not as they admitted, not a novel technique. If you have the keys, which that was the point of this. If you have the keys from the key store, you can decrypt the conversations.
Right.
Is that a Freudian slip, Larry? You keep saying novel technique instead of novel technique.
Maybe. Novel was just smoke and mirrors, man.
It sounds like a Freudian slip to me. Yeah. Let's leave it at that.
Just going back to the Wayback Machine.
Yep.
That's right.
Homage to one of my my mentors way back in the day. Novel's just smoke and mirrors, man.
So one of the interesting things, though, as I was looking at the Signal, I was thinking about, I've had people coming to me saying, what WhatsApp or Signal, and I was starting to research and discovered with the WhatsApp I can decrypt stuff on multiple devices. Signal only one. I'm thinking, well, that's a step up. But now I'm thinking, did I read it wrong?
No, Signal. Well, no, Signal encrypts everything on all wherever you have Signal. It's encrypting your messages on that device.
Yeah. So each device is a separate client where you can have shared on the WhatsApp, if I recall.
Yeah, but
you can do shared with Signal, i.e. I have Signal on my phone and one of my Macs, and both devices can read the messages.
Correct.
But you have to authorize additional devices, and I'm assuming that does some key exchange.
Yeah, it's a linked device. So when I install Signal on my Linux computer, for example, it asks me, or I go on my phone and I say add linked device, and I scan a QR code, and it syncs it, and all the messages are encrypted.
But it doesn't sync historical messages because it's syncing one time going forward. The way in which that encryption works is not, it is per device, but it is separate encryption between the devices.
Right. Correct. Yeah, don't get the
So it's not
messages
going to go
through.
down and give me down decrypted in my old stuff. Just moving forward.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
hard.
And Moxie also did say, which is interesting, if you listen to the Joe Rogan podcast where they talk for like 3 hours. Awesome. If you go, it's on my list. Like if we were to recap best podcast that I listened to in 2020, some of those Darknet Diaries episodes would be up there that he released this year, and Joe Rogan and Moxie, Muller and Spike, because Moxie also said that, like, hey, one of the things we're working on, like right now, Signal's tied to, like, I have to have a mobile device with a SIM card in order to enable it. And it's like, we're working on stuff that maybe you don't have to do that, and maybe compete with some of the other messaging platforms and provide really good encryption and really good implementation of encryption, and also be a not-for-profit company that isn't going to shove ads down your throat or violate your privacy. Like, they don't care. I mean, Moxie said in the interview, there's like, dude, the only thing, like, I might be able to look up in Signal's database is, like, maybe your name and your phone number. He's like, I don't have any other information about it. Like, they store nothing about you. I think it's a really interesting model.
So what's next, Paul?
Hey, can we do the story I posted for Larry?
Let's
Sure.
do one of Jeff's stories.
All right, my last story, I think it was number 7. It's all you, Larry.
Oh, yeah, I had one of these too, yeah.
Yeah, you did.
Yep.
You did. So Jeff's story number 7, Paul's story number 9.
Number 9.
This is some great
9.
research out of Cornell, specifically one gentleman and their team, Mordecai Guri. So both out of Ben Gurion in Israel, as well as some stuff out of Cornell. So this one gentleman, Mordecai Guri, has been involved with 19 different out-of-band data exfiltration techniques for jumping air-gap networks, which is terrifying.
Yeah,
So-
I almost want to do a research project where we identify and describe all of these, because we've covered so many, right? And they
Yeah.
reference some of them in the article.
Yep. And some of those, it's like, I feel like when Faith and I did Vapor Trail, like some of our things that we were thinking about there when we developed that, we're like, well, what if we could do that with modulating the PWM to control your fans
Right.
in your gaming rig? And sure enough, they've got fansmitter, but it's the sound emanated by the fan, but you're still modulating the PWM to change the sound of the fan. So like, that's like, there's ton of stuff here. Effectively, what this particular one does is the access of RAM can, in particular patterns and of various timing, can generate electromagnetic waves in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, which is the same where Wi-Fi lives. So it can generate a, quote, weak Wi-Fi signal that is interceptable by standard Wi-Fi cards.
Right.
I don't know how it's not true Wi-Fi. They're not building a Wi-Fi network. I don't know what type of packets they're building, largely because the research paper is behind kind of like a paywall, and I haven't read it. But it's not Wi-Fi, but
No, it's 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency that's emitted by RAM, which I didn't know. I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know that that happened.
I mean, it can in certain circumstances. Just like you on a Raspberry Pi, you can generate, standard broadcast FM by toggling a pin. Effectively, what you're doing here is you're toggling a pin accessing RAM at a specific speed to generate 2.4 gigahertz electromagnetic energy. There was one that came out about a month ago by which changing the speed of your Ethernet port between 10, 100, or 100, 1000 at specific intervals was able to you're effectively changing the electrical characteristic so that you could use that for exfil of data by just changing the speed of your Ethernet adapter. Like similar types of things, by doing things at a specific cadence, at a specific speed, you generate electrical signals, which then effectively generate RF energy. And in this case, it happens to be doing it at a speed where it's in the 2.4 gigahertz range because of the access speed of the memory.
Oh, but in the Ethernet cable example, Larry, the cable itself emits RF energy, different signatures when you change the speed.
Right, because you're putting data down the line, which is an electrical signal. That electrical signal has some electromagnetic footprint into the environment.
Yep.
So every time there's electrical signal going down a wire, there's some electromagnetic interference that's coming out of it. And if you pulse that signal at a specific rate, you're effectively creating RF energy.
Right.
And even with shielded cables, would that happen, or depends on the shielding, right?
Depends on the shielding.
Yeah. So, Larry, I want you to patent your next Faraday cage PC computer case. I'll buy. I'll be customer number one.
Okay. I will get it. So put your router in it so it protects it from 5G. How's that?
And that too. And something with the fans, because the fans can emit energy. So but we can't block the fans. That'd be very.
Some other folks that want to comment. So.
All I want to say.
Go ahead, Jeff.
All I want to say is take everything that Larry has just been talking about, wrap that around all of our conspiracy theory about, SolarWinds being the tip of the iceberg. Cold War.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the research, and the research is coming out of Israel, right? And you're talking about air-gap networks and trying to get data across air-gap networks. You can make some inferences around what this research is used for, what they're trying to build it for, and kind of the target platform, right? This is definitely ICS. This is definitely very targeted and niche case uses that is going to be probably bought and developed and hushed. So all of these novel cases, they're very novel. You probably don't have to worry about them from an enterprise standpoint. But if you work in, say, ICS or, part of a nation state and you're trying to exfil data from very specific targets, this might be useful.
Yep. Now that said, Tyler, and, when Faith and I put together Vapor Trail, that was very indicative of, we took cheap hardware that two normal people in the security industry that had a vague interest could do this without nation state sponsorship and for under $100. And we were totally doing this. Like, this is some interesting stuff with significantly more sponsorship, and what are the nation states able to complete? But I think the one that is really interesting is that the technique, and I'm going to read from the article, the technique with different air-gap computer rigs where the Wi-Fi card was removed was able to leak data at speeds of 100 bits per second.
That's really slow.
Well,
but over an extended period of time, that is exactly fast enough, depending on the type of data that you're looking to leak.
Yeah, I was going to say
it's exactly the same.
It's office space, Yeah. Who's going to notice?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it reminds me a lot of covert channels, right? I mean, it's the same kind of thing. You've got a very, very tiny little straw, but you can still get data through it. And covert channels are very, very similar. You might flip a bit in the IP header and the application protocol header. It doesn't matter.
Those little cocktail straws in your drink, Jeff. If you drink from those long enough, you get drunk.
That's right.
I mean, you talk about the
great analogy. you keep sipping on the little straw, you're gonna get the bang, right? It's gonna happen.
I don't know if the straw's small enough and you're large enough.
You just gotta suck harder, Jeff.
So one of the things that's going through my head
that's not a mantra for 2021. Good Lord.
Sorry, I hear Tyler chiming in there.
Oh no, I was just saying, like, the protocol matters. Though you think about things like Modbus or DMP3, you're talking about very small amounts of data that do very specific things on like a PLC. You're not talking about a large amount of data. So
that's a good point.
The size of the data only matters based on the protocol or devices it's communicating with.
The size of the data matters not. Master Yoda said, right?
It's the bandwidth.
Well, you've effectively changed the ratio, is what Tyler's saying, right? When you only need to make that device do something, maybe you only need 150 bytes. Well, if you can get if you can get 100 bits at a pace out of that, it might be fast enough to do what you need it to do in a reasonable time period.
Yep. Our argument was if you can run tools on those networks or do enough monitoring of those networks to distill down the little bits of information that you needed, our argument was run responder and get hashes. Like, how much data over a period of time do you really need to get some hashes to get you access to stuff for that data to preload your attacks? Like, those hashes are not long.
Right. I did have a story for Jeff, or I wanted
PCI.
Jeff's.
PCI.
Actually, not PCI related.
It's not PCI.
Jeff's other 3-letter acronym that Jeff sometimes uses, NSA. But the Zodiac killer Cypher has been solved. Now, there was multiple Cypher. I didn't go back and research heavily the Zodiac killer. From what I remember, they never found the person.
They have not.
Right, it's still an unsolved series of cases, and there was multiple ciphers that were involved in this case, and this was one of the ones that was, or the last one that was not solved. Is that true,
Jeff?
Well, I'm not an I'm sorry, I was distracted by somebody asking me about sucking harder. What was the last thing you said? Did you bring up the Kryptos statue?
It's similar to that, right? So this is a 51-year-old Cypher that was sent to a police station or police in 1969 in association with the Zodiac killer case. Zodiac killer still at large. I don't know. I believe there was more ciphers involved, and this was one of the ones that had not been. Is solved the right word? I don't want to say decrypted because that's not really. Is that appropriate?
Solved or well. Decrypted, technically, maybe not, depending on how it was.
The type of cipher.
Just what type of cipher it is. But most people aren't going to ping you. Even me, I'm not going to ping you for saying decrypt or versus solve. The crypto statue, CIA headquarters, 4 messages, 3 out of the 4 have been solved. The last one's very short, and that's why it's avoided solving. But even at least one of the there's a lot of articles about the Zodiac killer. I was reading quite a few of them. The Zodiac code. I'm sorry. I was trying to find articles where they actually talked about what was the cipher and how they were solving it, and there's not a lot of that detail that I have found yet, other than they're showing the messages. But I have found a couple things where apparently one of the things that was tripping them up, and they finally figured it out, was that the person that did the cipher screwed up. And made this huge error, and that was true of at least one of the messages on the crypto statue was that there was they'd written the wrong letter down, and so it didn't decrypt properly, and you were like going along and get to this. Well, that doesn't work. So I must be doing it wrong.
Or they did that on purpose, perhaps.
No. Well, if you understand human nature, errors are not usually done on purpose. Well, and especially in a military sense, because you want the intended recipient to be able to decrypt the message and do the right thing. But from this type of perspective, the Zodiac killer, I mean, maybe he could have done it, but the type of error that he made, because it had something to do with, it sounds like it's a transposition cipher, which means there was some sort of master thing that had the alphabet written down, and the way you get from one character to the next is like over 2 down 1 or down 2 over 1, and
down 1 over 2.
For a segment of it, they went down 1 instead of down 2 or something like that.
Gotcha.
It was, so they went down 1 over 1, and my understanding was that it was only one instance, so they were able to get the first chunk, and then after that down 1 over 1, it was all screwed up. And once they figured that out, it was game over.
Yeah, so they've, as far as I know, they've solved all of the Zodiac messages except for the last one, which is very short. And it's I was just reading it earlier. my name is, and then there's just a few characters. And unfortunately, I think they said there's 13 characters. So it's probably the killer's name, but the problem is the way the transposition works, the way that they've solved it, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of right answers. You can make it work and create multiple names, and that would be problematic if you're trying to that doesn't mean that somebody isn't gonna look at the cold case file and find out all the suspects were, or look at the the census list or the phone book
right
for whatever city was it California somewhere?
I forget where. I want to say it was California.
By the San Francisco Chronicle.
I wanted to say it was San Francisco. I mean, so if you wanted to, connect the dots on the population of San Francisco, probably still going to have lots of names.
Yeah.
So,
and how many of those 10,000 possible variations actually generated human names as opposed to alien-based names?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's kind of cool because they're in the annals of crypto history. Was that a misspeak, Jeff, or was it anals?
Sorry, I had to.
No, it's perfect.
It's okay. That's a very Novell response.
Touche.
Or touche.
Touchy.
Is it
touchy? Touchy.
Yeah, touchy. So in the annals of history.
In the annals of crypto history, there's quite a few classic unsolved ciphers that crippies get out their pencils, or nowadays their computers, and they hammer away at them. Not crypto statue being one of them, but there's a book cipher or two or a dozen from the American Revolution that have never been solved that floated out, and they're aware. I don't have them all memorized, but you can Google codes and puzzles that have never been solved. There's quite a few of them out there.
It's really interesting.
Something to do over the holidays.
Kryptos being one, right?
Yeah, and I keep meaning to look at it because the sculptor that had written the thing in the first place, he's don't quote me on the numbers, but the last message is like maybe 27 characters, and he's dumped like 8 or 9 of the characters now, and I still haven't heard that anybody solved it. So
I don't believe I haven't heard, because that would be a big deal.
Yeah, that would be a big deal. And then maybe he could explain why he built a cryptographic statue in the middle of CIA headquarters, because NSA is the Crippy.
It's got some explaining to do.
He does.
Jeff, your story, Linus Torvalds said nothing that looks scary, an important new Linux kernel 5.10 update.
Yes, that is one of my stories. I just thought it was cool that they were asking Linus to comment on the latest build of Linux.
You mean Linus?
I thought it was Novell that they got him to say something. But maybe he does it all the time. What do I know? I'm not a tech geek. I'm not one of the 1% like you guys are.
What was his quote in reference to? Oh, nothing that looks scary. Most of the patches are very small, and the biggest one fixing pin mapping definitions for a pin control driver. I know that's in reference to.
Well, yeah, he was referencing whatever the latest kernel mods or updates to the OS was, essentially. I didn't read it for that much detail.
Gotcha.
I just saw Torvalds, and I thought I'd put it up there.
Always has something interesting and sometimes mostly provocative to say, usually.
Nothing scary here. Nothing to see.
Nothing scary.
Nothing
just
to
a kernel
see.
update. Nothing scary.
So one other one that Lee put in was Amnesia 33. Lee, do you want to kick that one off?
So that was the what was it? Forescout researchers. There are 33 vulnerabilities in the open source TCP Ip stack that millions of embedded devices have, pretty much in firmware, meaning you're going to get, you're not going to be fixing them right away, and and of course, the first thing I did when I saw this article is I said, "Hey, Larry, check this out."
A vulnerability in your TCP IP stack. Isn't that a quote? That's a quote from back in the day, old school.
Yeah. It is.
And in this case, it's not one TCP IP stack. It's 3 embedded firmware, embedded device IoT firmware IP stacks rather.
And who said IDS was dead?
Does that mean you IP Threely? Never.
Yes.
Oh. Someone take him out back and shoot him.
Many of them are related to IPv6 as well. Like, who puts IPv6 on their IoT devices? Apparently everybody. But nobody uses it because...
I heard it was the new sexy thing.
I know. I've heard it was the new sexy thing for years, Joff, but...
It will forever be the new sexy thing.
Yep. Yeah. Till they tear the IPv4 from my cold dead hands. No.
But it is still like astonishing, I should say, to me that at this day and age we still uncover vulnerabilities in the TCP IP stack. In fact, one of my stories.
It wasn't in the IP stack. It was in the implementations of the IP stack.
Yes.
It was
so UIP. Sorry, they analyzed 5 IP stacks. 3 of them had vulnerabilities. 33 different vulnerabilities. Many of them denial of service. A couple of RCEs. They analyzed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 IP stacks. Of them, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them had vulnerabilities. Some of them via fuzzing, many of them either information leakages or denial of service, but a few remote code executions in there as well.
Well,
and a million plus devices and 150 vendors. It's scary.
There is nothing like remote code execution in your network stack to jazz your whatever
on your IoT device, which was one of my stories.
On your IoT devices that are internet accessible. Come on, let's get the bar up there.
My story number 7, millions of unpatched IoT and OT devices threaten critical infrastructure. Armis uncovered that a whopping 97% of the OT devices impacted by Urgent 11 have not been patched, which was Urgent 11 was vulnerabilities in VxWorks in IPNet, in the IPNet stack on VxWorks.
Yeah.
What is IPNet? I don't remember now.
Yeah. But according to recent
IPNet
reports,
is their IP stack for QNX.
Gotcha.
So I got to make a bad joke, but according to recent reports, nation-state actors claim they don't need them because SolarWinds.
Say that about anything now, right? Also, 80% of the devices they found were affected by CDP pwn or CDPwn remain unpatched, which is a series of vulnerabilities in Cisco's CDP protocol.
Of course.
Yep.
Of course.
My favorite was actually getting to reference that in a recent report where, like, why are you running CDP in that network? Like, you don't know. No, definitely not.
Because it discovers stuff. Isn't that important? Isn't that asset management? No.
It is, but no.
Not securely.
So is Nmap.
Yeah.
That's like I remember the days when people say, man, that Metasploit stuff is bad. I was like, what's wrong with Metasploit? It's a great way to manage a network.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, think about this. You got these devices that are sitting around with embedded vulnerabilities or whatever. Like, how many home routers are out there that are 10 years old that haven't had a firmware update in 6 years, and they still work and they're still going?
But we just compounded the problem, Lee. Right? We were talking about vulnerable routers for the better part of maybe 14 plus years here on the show.
Right.
But now,
I mean,
look at the holiday shopping season. Now we're all at home going, yeah, it'd be really cool if we had like a smart device that could dispense treats to the dogs, because that'd be fun, right? And we should have
I need
a new
two.
dishwasher, and like I need a notification on my phone when my dishwasher is going to be done and all that stuff. And so we've just now, I mean, the proliferation of IoT devices.
Well, and these new Amazon Echoes that have Amazon Sidewalk built in, so you can share your Wi-Fi with everyone on the planet.
That's a good idea.
What could go wrong, Larry?
While working from home with those shared accounts.
Right?
Bingo! Because SolarWinds.
Well,
Just huge.
So
I mean,
actually,
a huge attack surface of stuff that has vulnerabilities. I mean, but it's interesting. Like some manufacturers, even in just a casual cursory look that I've done, I'm like, hey, you got a little better. Like, you've made some improvements, but there's like the other 80% of the industry, right? It largely has not made those same strides, and that includes devices in the enterprise as well.
Yeah. So Paul, I mean, James Lidi Vidal and I are working on the new SANS course, Sec 556, for IoT pen testing, and I've mentioned this in other shows. We've reviewed so many sets of firmware, me personally, in the last couple of months, and we're still hacking like it's 15 years ago.
You're still bin walking like it's 5 years ago anyway, right?
No, we're still bin walking like it was, writing the book, the WRT 54G book.
Right.
Like literally we just did a session with SANS that was not recorded at Tech Tuesday, where I taught a module of the upcoming course, a pre-alpha version, and we did a sort of hands-on instructor-led lab, and here's your stuff and go find stuff. And like we found collectively between the registrants and myself a bunch of stuff that we didn't even know that was there.
I was gonna say, how much ODay did you find in that one exercise?
There was probably 15 different sets of things that had been previously undiscovered.
Oh, that's
nice. But not only Linux-based OSs, but also QNX from VxWorks.
Yep.
Like,
wow, crazy stuff.
Oh. So we haven't made much progress then.
No. Yeah, depends on the vendor.
Does depend on the vendor, but largely we've made it cheaper and easier to produce these devices now, and therefore there's more of them. So like we're still behind the curve.
Like for example, one device that I don't have access to the firmware to, but I was using for work, and I don't have permission to destroy the device yet. Logged into the device via the command line and found that they were not using Etsy Shadow on the device, and that it was Etsy password, and the passwords were easily reversible, and there was a account that was there that was not documented and had an easily guessable password.
And that's
which is
you remember the C2 secure script?
I do.
Where it split password and shadow. I'm like, that was supposed to be, we're moving past this. We're going to get this all done, wasn't it?
That was like, that was like 20 plus, 20, 30 years ago.
I was going to say 30 probably.
Right? More
like
than 30.
In writing the course, I'm using this as a case study. And some of the things that I'm finding, like, how the hell do I go back and do this in a world where these new tools don't exist? Like, how do I crack an Etsy password file? Like you now, all the tools assume Etsy Shadow and Etsy Password. You have to combine them in this format. Like, shit, I have to take an Etsy password file that has all the stuff and make it work.
You're going to go to archive.org and find some Perl scripts back in the day to do it, right?
No, he's not. He's gonna end up doing cat password pipe cut dash D
there you
colon.
go. Get the hash.
Yes, like I have to freaking reinvent the wheel, which is terrifying.
Pun intended.
These old things haven't gone away.
Well, you just bring up Joff to get him to write you a Python script. It's all good.
No. I want to write the Python script and have Joff troubleshoot for me.
Yes.
Like,
so in the
better.
day, it would have been written in Perl.
Yep.
Well, of course. You know what? It probably won't work if it's in Python. You probably have to write it in Perl.
Yes. When working with such old technology, Larry, embrace it and write it in Perl.
No.
No, he says still like not going there.
Python 3 all the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, baby.
No, I agree. Yeah, Python 3 for the win.
What's up next?
Hey, can I shamelessly?
Hold on, Joff. And then Lee, I wanted to get to maybe one or at least one more of your stories, but Joff has a public service announcement first, and then we'll do my story number 16.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Paul. Hey, quick public service announcement is this. I am teaching a class under the Wild West Hackenfest umbrella that's upcoming in January. It's called Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development, scheduled for January 19th. And we are going to cover everything from everything from commodity C2 frameworks to threat modeling, attack emulation, anatomies of C2 channel, anatomies plural, oh my God. We're going to study an open C2 RAT framework that I'm developing and do lots of programming language stuff with shellcode execution and delivery, and we're just going to have all kinds of fun. So if you're interested, we've got a link. It's a bit.ly/JOFS, plural, C2 class with capital J, capital C, and C there. And we'll post it in the Discord as well. I believe Sammy is working on that right now.
Sweet.
Love to have you come
C2
on.
class.
And Joff, you're doing something special where you're donating some of the profits or something of the like?
My goodness. Thank you, Larry, for reminding me. And we actually, just last week on the show, we had Chloe Mestagi on the show, and I think she's going to become one of the recipients of our donation. So what we're doing is 10% of the proceeds are going to be donated to underrepresented people in cybersecurity for the advancement of their careers or whatever they choose to use it for. Right now, that demographic is women. And so we have a number of organizations on the list that we are going to donate to, things like WeSys, Cypher, and
Girls Who Hack?
There's a number of them, but I forgot what Chloe's organization is, but we put her on the list as well. So I'm really excited about that charitable aspect of what we're doing.
So Joff, not without putting you on the spot, can you give me a dollar value as to what you think you're hoping to raise? Like, make me do the math. That's fine. How many students do you have enrolled? What's the course cost?
Okay. Actually, good point. The course is going for $495. It is 16 hours. We're going to do lightweight. We're going to do 4 hours a day. So 4 hours over 4 days. So give you lots of space, and it's a nice training format. Like I said, $495. We have getting upwards towards 50 students enrolled right now. We're hoping to shoot for about 75. So, do the math on that. With any luck, we can get a $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 maybe going out the door for charities.
Yeah. So Joff, what is your cap on the course? You say you have 50 now. You have 75.
So I'm willing to go the whole way. I'm getting a couple of TAs to help me out. As it stands already, we're going to cap at a max of 200, which is a gracious plenty. I don't think we're going to get that far. Wow. We'll probably cap out about 75. What it's looking right now, and everything that we're doing, the lab environment is going to be stood up in Azure. With a very standardized build that all the students can use for basically a development environment as we're going through the class. So really looking forward to it.
Sweet.
Outstanding.
John, I'll talk to you offline about some other stuff, but we'll figure that off offline.
Sounds good. Give me a call.
Lee, did you have other stories you wanted to cover?
I did have one more, but I hadn't really looked at it. It was the one my wife gave us. My number 3, it was 3 million devices infected by basically crapped up Chrome and Edge add-ons. Was like,
oh, I did see that one.
And I was like, what the hell? I thought we were learning to be wary and careful of add-ons for browsers.
Right? And Microsoft was like, we have IE, and we all was like, that's really crappy and really vulnerable. So then, I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about Microsoft's browser history, right? Ultimately, it's like, well, Chrome has the best browser engine, perhaps. And so we'll adopt that, we'll call it Edge. But yet, one of the downfalls of Chrome, other than their JavaScript interpreter, is their add-on system, which they haven't been able to lock down. I mean, much like they really haven't been able to achieve Apple iOS kind of level standards with their App Store and Google Play Store on Android, that similar problems persist inside of the browser. And here we are back talking about vulnerable add-ons.
Right. I mean, I mean, the thing about what is it? The core thing with the browser is where, memory is supposed to be read or write. Because of the way browser work, you have to have memory that's both writable and executable for JavaScript and the like to work. What could go wrong, right? I'd love to see a time when we really, by exception, have extensions. The browsers don't let them in by default. But that might be a little too severe.
Well, I think they need to be sandboxed, but the browser is now a complex beast of rendering engines and JavaScript engines and the glue that stitches it together. All those layers have to talk to each other. I mean, it really kind of similar to the rings in an operating system, almost. And it took us how many years to almost get that right, or get that right more often than not, I guess I should say. And now we're trying to take that same concept and apply it to the browser. And we're starting all over again. And there were a lot of the browser exploits revolve around basically those kind of like rings of trust, right? Like there's the rendering, there's the windowing engine. Each tab has its own memory space, but a lot of it is shared. And then you get throw add-ons into the mix, and issues abound.
I mean, the browser is the next operating system, right? Like the browser is effectively, we're running apps in there. Everything is real time. A lot of our work is done software as a service, and those have their own network stacks. You start talking about WebSockets. This is where a lot of the C2 and attack vectors are having to go. If phishing is going to be ineffective, getting JavaScript to render is fairly straightforward, and now we're looking at how do we communicate through that using things like WebSockets. This is probably the next big playground that you'll see C2 and attackers leveraging for corporate assets because of SaaS single sign-on and everybody utilizing browsers from that standpoint.
It's interesting. The browser still becomes our crutch for so many reasons, because developing an app for every single platform today is a huge pain in the ass. Also, you don't know what platform your users are going to be coming to want to be able to use your application. You get the oddball cases like me in Linux, and I mean, to a certain extent, I love the browser functionality because Chrome runs on Linux. That means I get access to a whole bunch of applications without having to run them natively in Linux, which is kind of interesting. But
that means you have to run them in the browser, which and especially Chrome, is a huge memory hog, and
CPU too, Larry. I know you end up speccing, again, back to that 1%. We just spec out our machines to be way more power than we need. A lot of that is to run Chrome. Like every time I've spec'd out, put it this way, every time I spec'd out a machine where I'm like, yeah, that should be enough to like get by, right? Then I run Chrome, and God forbid one communications application, Skype, Zoom, Teams, you name it, they're all pretty much equally as bad about hogging CPU. I'm like, yeah, I should have done that 16 core and not 8 or whatever it is, right? But again, we're the 1%. But still, people are still use browsers all the time, independent of native applications.
Hey, before you jump to your stories, Paul, I just wanted to highlight Lee's story number 12 about hackers target groups and COVID-19 vaccine distribution, says IBM. This happy hour I was on last night, the guy that runs it works at IBM, and he actually brought on the researchers mentioned in this article, and they gave a whole talk on this. Really interesting stuff. I would encourage people to read the article. We don't have to talk about it now, but just want to highlight it while everybody's bored, wishing they could be watching us over the holidays.
Yeah, I think it's one thing I've been rattling around in my brain, and I know it's really the counter argument to capitalism, but when we think about open source software, and what if we were to relate that to vaccines? One could propose, I know I'm saying we do this, right? But I got to thinking, like, shouldn't the vaccine be essentially open source? Shouldn't we allow anyone to, once we figure out how to do it, allow anyone to do it? I understand capitalism costs a lot of money to develop the vaccine, and companies want to make money, and there's more than one company that's producing vaccines in the world. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be better for humanity to just open source the vaccine and all kind of learn from each other? I mean, we did some of that with COVID, right? China did produce the the RNA sequencing for the virus so that we could develop the vaccine. So there are certainly certain aspects of that are, I don't know, air quotes, open source. Tyler, I don't know if you looked into any, of that in some of your research. You and I have been, you more so than I, but researching vaccines, the way the COVID virus works, just because it's in the news, we want to educate ourselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is a good framework, and the collaboration around this vaccine and the companies overall that have devoted time, money, resource into doing this. This is the fastest and most collaboration you'll probably see in a while. It's a global pandemic. Everybody's best interest is to get it out there. Therefore, a lot of the EDUs contributed. There was a ton of pharma data sharing, the mRNA sequencing and data between the different organizations and getting that to multiple pharmaceutical companies. Like, we've not seen that before. The ability to do that has, obviously demonstrated it as being effective and a good use case, because we've got a vaccine that is very, very high efficiency rate in a very, very short amount of time with a proven, mRNA is not the standard way of building a vaccine. And so building on technology that we've already come up with from SARS-1 to move it to this and doing that data sharing between those, it shows what kind of impact and what kind of time frame we can actually come when we start to collaborate. So I think it's a good framework, and I think it will, moving forward, kind of come back to that. With capitalism in there, there's plenty of money that can be made. This is not going to go anywhere. Insurance is going to be paying for a lot of this. So
Tyler, what do you know to the extent of like what was shared? Because I think because the mRNA protein that's in the vaccine is not new.
Nope.
Which is largely a misconception if you read any kind of social media, right? It was actually used to treat cancer patients. And so did the company that find that be like, here's all of our research? Because that would be awesome, right?
Yeah, there was a ton of sharing around the mRNA. mRNA technology is not new. I mean, it's relatively new for
vaccines,
this particular vaccine, for using it for vaccine transport. But yeah, there was a ton of information sharing from that technology, the spike bonding proteins and the way that works, and the information from SARS-1 that we learned, that was all kind of distributed and collaborated on. And then the EDUs really working through the sequencing of that. We got that sequenced in I think it was 14 days.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so there was a ton of computing power that was put behind that, and then that was shared out to kind of get these trials moving. And stuff was created prior to even knowing if it would work, because they wanted to have the distribution and have the supply in order to get this out. And so, yeah, it was a ton of research very quickly by a lot of people collaborating. So it's not one individual company. Someone had to sponsor it. And obviously, Pfizer is a big name, fairly trusted, and they had the resources to kind of push the propaganda and the marketing engine. But I think a lot of this was so well collaborated that they just had to put it behind someone.
Well, when we say it was moved through quickly, we don't mean that they didn't do human trials as much as they were required to do human trials with any vaccine or medication, right? It's still like something like 40 or 70,000 people still got it in human trials.
Oh, there's even more than that. Yeah. It's well over 100,000 now, and that's one thing that we're seeing, that there's not the shortcuts that, there's a bunch of propaganda around the shortcuts and safety of this. But really, when you look at the number of trials and how this was done by volunteers and the amount of resources that were had, this is way better than a lot of the trials that happen over an extended period of time. Yeah, you have that time frame to kind of weed out any of the one-offs or, weird cases. But for the most part, we've got more clinical and human trials that have happened so quickly because there's a ton of people that want to volunteer, that want this out there. So it's a testament to how, if you get some resources behind it and some money backing it, you can come up with something that's very safe and very effective.
And largely, I think we did a good job, Jeff, back to your point, right, of thwarting the attacks that were attacking this process, basically.
Well, I was going to say, I can't say much because of the Chatham House rules, but this particular person that was talking about a particular pharmaceutical company, was, and I'm not going to get my dates right, but the very first rumors, the very first murmurs that that this virus was coming about, dates back, I think, to late last year. And they basically were saying they were on it right from the start, and all the pharmaceuticals were, so all the collaboration that Tyler was talking about, plus they've been really focused on it. So, there's more vaccines that are going to be coming, and I don't want to, I feel like I would be betraying the Chatham House rules. This one pharmaceutical company is taking a very different approach with the vaccine, which I think is very significant, and it's coming, but I can't say what it is, unfortunately. But I think there's money to be made by a lot of the pharmaceutical companies in this instance. To your question about capitalism, and they're getting the goodwill, they're getting the name recognition. Hey, Pfizer, they gave me my vaccine. I'm gonna go, buy whatever else they sell, Tylenol or whatever it is.
Yeah. So Jeff, two of the things that I think interesting on the financial front is that there are less vaccines available to the U.S. in that a number of these companies have already sold vaccines to other countries. So
although I just saw a headline, on Twitter not too long ago that said Pfizer's got millions of vaccines sitting in a warehouse with no distribution instructions. So there's
distribution's really hard.
And that speaks to supply chain as well. They have gotten vaccines out to many frontline.
I saw Providence, Rhode Island was getting them. That was part of
my wife. Actually, full disclosure, one of the reasons why I researched the vaccine and been talking with Tyler, who's also researched the vaccine, is my wife actually got the first round of the Pfizer vaccine on Monday night,
cool.
which I mean, and healthcare workers were ecstatic. I mean, they're on the front lines working with COVID patients, and those are the first people that received it. I believe there are elderly nursing home patients that also qualify that have received the vaccine in many states across the U.S. as well. And certainly the U.K. Came before the U.S. in getting the vaccine. Many of their elderly population has already received the vaccine as well.
Yeah, William Shakespeare, talk about old people. He was one of the first ones in the U.K. to get it.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. No relation. And I think this is thinking about this financially, Paul, I think, Pfizer and these other companies that are basically not getting paid for the vaccine, but the work that they've been able to do complete in this short period of time with the RNA and all this type of stuff will lead to many other things that they can sell and make a profit. Mm-hmm. And this is effectively a research cost. It's a loss cost.
Right. Loss leader.
It's a loss leader, exactly, which is. And it's going to be huge for so many of these companies for things moving forward. Yep.
I found a really cool article. The title really got me, because and as I unpack the article, there's a lot of nerd stuff in there. There's some hip hop in there, and there's the quality issues in there as well. And I was like, but all in a positive light. And I want to unpack it too, because I think we can do better. But there is an individual, and I remember I didn't actually have her name in the quote here, but it's my story number 16, and the title was "I am the dopest NASA engineer you will ever meet. A 26-year-old turns a mistake of being added to an honors geometry class to becoming a rocket scientist." True story. African American woman accidentally gets added to an honors chemistry class, and she was excited, and then they're like, no, like it was by accident, and she was like, no, I still want to stay in the class. They're like, well, you can transfer to this other class, and she's like, no, I want to stay. And then she got an A, and turns out that now she's a NASA scientist. Like, great story. I don't want to see this happen as a mistake. I want to see this happen on purpose, right? That we take people with the appropriate skills and aptitude and apply those to provide them with the opportunity to be awesome in a lot of these fields, such as science and engineering. The other part of the article was like she's got this thing for hip hop and like makes videos about for students that are like learning about the different units of measure, and like produced this hip hop video on it, which is just really awesome. And it's like the same person, and she's received honors from various organizations about her work. It was just a really positive and inspiring story that I wanted to kind of end our year on.
I mean,
It's an awesome story.
Go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say, it's an awesome story. I think the headline doesn't do it justice. I mean,
agreed. Read the article.
And no offense to anybody. I think that they could have come up with this is not your ordinary rocket scientist. Might be a better thing, but the heck with that. This is just amazing, and it is a good feel-good story, and we need more of those.
Yes. Her name is Deja Williams, St. Louis-bred math and science geek in her third year at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Los Angeles, California.
I think that speaks to, like, really when you get pushed past your comfort zone, you can almost always step up to that if you take the challenge on. That's, I mean, that's ultimately most of the personal development that I've done. Almost all of it is just pushing yourself out of comfort zones and taking on or learning something new in a new way, or looking at something in a different way, which is kind of the hacker mentality, right? But doing that in all aspects of life, if you push yourself outside that comfort zone, that's the only place that you grow. So this is a great example of how that should work and how that does work.
It's interesting. She addresses some of the language gaps, too. In an interview, she says, sometimes education, at least in math and science, can be a very traumatic experience, especially for kids of color. They're not necessarily taught in the language you learned growing up, right? And many of us grew up in different areas and different backgrounds with different, styles of language. That maybe don't translate. I mean, we see that in the boardroom all the time, right? Like, we're nerds and we talk our nerd speak, and we know that doesn't translate into the boardroom, so we need a more common language. And Deja's using hip-hop songs to, like, bridge some of that language of math and science into more popular culture. I think that's really cool. I mean, being a huge fan of hip-hop, of course, I think that's so awesome. We need that for security. Kind of like dual core, I guess, is one example of that, one could say.
Although you should also look at Bo's awesome Spotify album, Joff. I hope you've listened to it, but Bo Bullock's album is, I'll give a drop here. Like, he is a security practitioner that also plays phenomenal guitar and has a nice soundtrack that really, I can't speak highly enough of it. It is it's one of my favorites right now.
How does one find it?
Let's see. I will drop a link into Slack and have someone upload it somewhere.
Yeah, I've seen them play. Well, I've seen Bo and Joff jamming out in Deadwood.
That we did.
And both of you are amazing musicians.
All right, thank you, sir. I don't often get a chance these days, but music's good for the soul, for sure.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Jeff, why don't you go get your guitar and take us out for this episode? Come on.
Well, if I had a guitar. Sorry, can't help it.
I'd say piano, but I know that's hanging on the wall in your dining room.
Yeah, it is.
Which is ironic that I'd love to take up music and I never find the time just because so many other competing projects and stuff. But I have a guitar. I have a ukulele, and I was like, I should probably learn the piano. Meaning I should buy a piano and not learn the piano.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
great piece of furniture.
Right.
You're just it's good. Yeah. You're just looking to redecorate.
Exactly. So I've got too many other things to deal with, and and of course I buy new digital radios, and like they're sitting right here, and like, oh yeah, it requires some setup and some Raspberry Pis, and this is going to be awesome. Like, yep. Well, it's only been 3 days, so I've got some hope yet. So,
any other stories or things you want to mention in our last Paul Security Weekly for 2020?
It's been good. It's been real. It's been 2020. So let's move on.
Let's look forward to 2021 and hope it's better than 2020, which in 2020 set the bar really low.
Yes, it did.
So, yeah, the only thing I'd like to say, as moving out of 2020, Paul, is that for much of 2020, it's been a dumpster fire, and I think moving towards the end of it, that dumpster fire has been picked up and thrown into a larger dumpster, which is also on fire. So, maybe we're hitting or about to hit the lowest of the low, and hopefully we can only go up from here.
All uphill
look
from
forward
here,
to seeing many of you when things are sane, and we love our community. And
I don't know if we're getting sane again. Maybe when we're healthy.
We can still be insane and very healthy. So.
Yep.
Well, here's to seeing all of you in person, hopefully sometime in 2021.
Seriously.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
Amen.
Seeing you in person and travel where it's appropriate and not having to travel as much where it isn't.
Right.
There you go.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching this episode of False Security Weekly. That'll do it for 2020 on this show. Larry, take us out.
Over and... out.